Today's reading is taken from Acts chapter 15, starting at verse 36, and then finishing at chapter 16, verses 10. Disagreement between Paul and Barnabas. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing." Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him, because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Timothy joins Paul and Silas. Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was Jewish and a believer, but whose father was a Greek. The believers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they travelled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in numbers. Paul's vision of the man of Macedonia. Paul and his companions travelled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So reads the word of the Lord.
Well, it is good to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I say that, but probably 99% of you had no say in inviting me or not, so thank you for bearing with me, but it's good to be here. So I've known Simeon a long time, and what we're going to do this morning is ask a question, and the question is this: what three things does global mission need? Now, the danger, as soon as you put that title up, the danger is, I'll get to the end and I'll share three things, and you might well say, yes, but you've forgotten about this one and this one and this one. So it's not necessarily an exhaustive list, but I think there are three key things. And actually, the same question could be rephrased as, what three things does New Milton Evangelical Church need? What three things does Phillip Street Chapel, the church I go to, need? What three things does United Beach Missions involved in that need? So that's the question we're going to try and answer today. I wasn't going to mention this, but here's a little quiz for you. As you think about God's heart for the nations, we've just sung about God's reconciling the nations. As you go through the Bible, what do you think is the last reference, if you like, to God's heart for the nations in the Bible? Which book would you go for? Revelation, okay. Now, which chapter would you go for? That's a bit more tricky, isn't it? Okay, there are 22 chapters in Revelation. The answer is, I think, Revelation 22. But it says, the tree of life for the healing of the nations. So the very last chapter of the Bible talks about God's heart for the nations. So the question is, which is the first book in the Bible that talks about God's heart for the nations? Genesis. Okay, now this is which chapter do you think? And there's a bit of, this is my view anyway. We've got Genesis 12, which is God said to Abraham that all nations through him would be blessed, all families would be through it. But I think it's actually Genesis 1. Okay? Because in Genesis 1, God's command was, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Now, this is a command before the fall, and God is saying, I want more people across the whole world worshipping me. Okay, but then the fall happened, sin came into the world, and there's a whole period of history. And then I think God repeats that command in a slightly different way in Matthew 28, make disciples, fill the earth and be fruitful and multiply, make disciples of all nations that fill the earth. So I think what you have in Matthew 28 is just what God's desire was in Genesis chapter 1. That is you can have a little discussion about that over lunchtime. But okay, what three things does New Milton Evangelical Church need? What three things does Global Mission need? And we're going to look at the story of Paul just about to start his second missionary journey. So this is the story so far. Paul and Barnabas in Acts 13 start their first missionary journey, and they leave Antioch, the sending church, and they go to Cyprus. They go to a place called Pisidian Antioch. They go to Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, I don't know which way you say it. And they have this first missionary journey. They come back more or less the same route, and they arrive back in Antioch, and they report back on not what they have done. We're told they report back on what God has done. And then in chapter 15, Acts 15, you have this sort of quite a tricky topic that they have to deal with. So you have what's called the Council of Jerusalem in chapter 15, and Paul and Barnabas speak into that situation. And then at the end of 15, starting at verse 36, Paul and Barnabas said, we need to go back and see those people who become Christians in those places that we've been to. And Barnabas basically says, that's a good idea. Let's take John Mark with us. And then basically the conversation is Paul saying, wait a minute. We can't possibly take John Mark. Don't forget, he deserted us on the first journey. When we got to Cyprus, he left us. And we're told that they had this, a bit of a debate, a bit of an argument, and a sharp disagreement, so that Paul and Barnabas could not agree on this issue of taking John Mark. Now, who was right? Paul or Barnabas? Well, that's not the subject of today's message, so I'm not going to tell you. But I will say this. It's interesting, towards the end of Paul's life, and Paul had lots of co-workers, lots of individuals who worked with him, and they were all useful to him. But Paul picks out two individuals specifically and says quite clearly, these people were useful to me. One was a chap called Onesimus, who was a bit of a rogue, but then was wonderfully converted. And Paul says, Onesimus is useful to me. Then in 2 Timothy, Paul says, bring John Mark. He's useful to me. So whatever happened in 15, then by the end of Paul's life, they had obviously had some reconciliation and were doing gospel work together. Anyway, so what happens is that Paul thinks, okay, this is not going so well so far. I want to do mission again. I'm on my own. So Paul, at the start of chapter 15, is wanting to do, end of chapter 15, is wanting to do mission. He's on his own. So what three things does Paul need as he starts his second missionary journey? And what three things do we need as a local church? What three things does Global Mission need? So the first thing is this. Paul needs new helpers. And what you find is he's on his own at the start of the journey, and by chapter 16, verse 10, the team had quadrupled in size, which is quite amazing, isn't it? And we'll come through those, who the team is in a minute. But you know what those animals are on the picture? By the shape of, the formation that they're flying in. They are geese, okay. And geese fly in V formation to be much more effectively. It's like the, the peloton in the Tour de France, isn't it? You know, all the cyclists sort of tuck in behind each other and they swap positions just to go a bit faster. And I guess someone must have done a PhD in this, but apparently if geese fly in V formation, they fly 71% further, or without getting too tired, or something like that. I'm not the research into this. But the idea is this: you have a goose at the front who flaps his or her wings, and the other geese falling behind into the slipstream. And that goose at the front keeps flapping his or her wings, and then eventually gets quite tired. So that goose will drop to the back, and another goose will take the lead and flap his or her wings. And because the front goose, this is true, the front goose is busy flapping his or her wings, they just concentrate on that. And all the geese behind them, they're flapping their wings, they've got a bit more energy, so they also honk. They honk to encourage the goose at the front. And the idea is they're working together as a team. That's the whole point. Okay, they're much more effective when they're working together. They go further. They conserve more energy. And what we have here really is a team of people that joined Paul. And the first, we're going to look at all of them. And the first one is Paul himself. And there were 4 people who joined in the team. And what happens is, all of us can learn from all of them, but probably there's 1 or maybe 2 that you think, yeah, that's more like me. So we're going to learn from all of them. But the idea, they are very, very different, these characters, but together they're working. So Paul, he's the man full of fervour. Now, we all need to be full of fervour. He's do you know those kind of people, the 100 ideas before breakfast kind of people? You get exhausted just listening to them because they've got another 20 ideas. And actually, 1 or 2 of them might be really good ideas, but there's probably some not so good ideas in there. That kind of just full of vigour and energy and vision, those kind of people. And I think Paul was that kind of person. And we ought to be those kind of people. Paul himself says in 1 Corinthians 9, "Woe is me if I preach not the gospel. No necessity is laid upon me." He talks about in Romans 15 that now I've got this desire to preach the gospel where no one else has preached it. And he talks about his passion for the lost. And so Paul is that kind of person, visionary, to seeing the need, thinking, we just got to get on with the job. And we need those people. And they can be exhausting to be with. And, they need people with them. But we do need to have those kind of people. And actually, we all need to have that same desire and fervency as we share the gospel. The second person is Silas. And Silas, I describe as, well, you don't see them on the roads now, but the Eddie Stobart, the steady Eddie kind of person. Silas, we're told, is a mature Christian. If you go back into chapter 15, we're told how he got alongside and discipled younger believers. You read that in Acts 15. And he was the sort of, yes, he had fervour. Yes, he was a get-up-and-go kind of person. But I think he was the sort of person who just got alongside people. And I think Paul did the same, but he got alongside people just to encourage them, exhort them, disciple them, help them. And as well as the people who got full of fervour and get up and go, you need those mature Christians who can just get alongside and just help and just disciple and just exhort, those kind of people. And actually all of us need to be those kind of people where we're encouraging others that we meet. Each of us needs to encourage one another. And so Silas was that kind of person. The third person I can identify in a couple of ways is Timothy, because that's my name. Now Timothy probably converted on Paul's first missionary journey, and what happens is in chapter 16 verses 1 and 3, he's got a good reputation. The people were speaking well of him. He was a godly young man, but he was a young man. And Paul says, I would like Timothy to join my team. We're not told this directly, but from what we know of Timothy, I think he'll probably think, me? No, you can't be serious. I'm young. Actually, I'm not quite sure I know what my gifts are yet. I think you've got the wrong man. And I think Timothy, as a young man, we're told that he was to discover his gifts, find the flame of gift within you. And we're told that he was a young man and people were despised his youth. And so I would think he's probably thinking, what am I going to bring to this team? I'm not really been a Christian that long. Is there a place for me? Surely, Paul, you got it wrong. Now, we're not told that. I think that's Timothy's nature. He was timid, he was shy, he was young, he was still learning what his gifts were. But Paul says, actually, no, come and join the team, and you will discover your gifts, and you will develop your gifts. And actually, you will then use those gifts in future ministry. So Timothy was thinking, what's there for me to do? But he joined the team. And actually, in New Milton Evangelical Church, you might think, well, what's there for me to do? There's a role. It's an old hymn we used to sing, actually. Some of you might know it. There's a work for Jesus, none but you can do. Does anyone know that hymn? It's an old one. There's a work for Jesus, none but you can do. Then the fourth member of the team is the forgotten one often, and it's Luke. Because he's not mentioned by name. If you look at verse 10, it says things like, we concluded. No, so he was writing this letter and says, we there. Now, Luke was a clever man. He was a doctor. But actually, he was willing to go on this journey and actually be forgotten. He wasn't desirous of making a name for himself, although he was perfectly qualified. He said, I'll be part of the team. And even if people forget about me, it doesn't matter, because I'm here to serve the Lord. And Luke was part of that team. And we learn from all of them. We need to have the same fervour as Paul. We need to have the same desire to disciple as Silas. We need to be willing to use our gifts, whatever, and discover those gifts like Timothy. And we need to be serving the Lord and be willing to be forgotten like Luke. But all together, they are one strong team. So when it comes to a global mission, actually, do you know, mission partners, missionaries, they're not some elite band of Christian who sort of hit a standard and therefore they can go and be missionaries. They're just ordinary people with ordinary lives seeking to serve the Lord in different places. All of us should be involved in global mission in some way, shape or form. It's not them and us. It's in partnership. We work together. And some will be obviously home-based, some will be in different parts of the world. But there's a work for all of us to do in global mission. And actually, you might think, well, that's something I can never do in terms of going and being cross-cultural in a different situation. Well, Timothy probably thought the same. There's work that we can all do. Okay, let's move on. And let's have a look at the next slide. Oh, yes. It says here, as well as those four, they were commended to the work, really, commended to the grace of the Lord, which I think is a lovely phrase. So there's a whole prayer team behind them as well. Okay. So Jim Elliot, you might have heard of that missionary. Jim Elliot once said this: missionaries are very human folks just doing what they are asked, simply a bunch of nobodies trying to exalt somebody. And it's 70 years ago this month that Jim Elliot was martyred by the Alca Indians. And this picture here is just simply, this is the financial year 2024 to 25. You're thinking, well, who are these people? These are the 30 new long-term mission partners that joined UFM in the financial year 24 to 25. And they're a motley crew, really. Okay, there's some single people, there's some married couples, there's some old people, some young people, there's some people with families. They're just ordinary people like you, like me, who said, well, the Lord has called us to serve in different places. So that picture is meant to be effectively reflective of this church. It's just ordinary people going about their ordinary Christian lives, but these people have said, where can I serve the Lord cross-culturally? So the first thing is new helpers. The second thing Paul needed was new horizons. And I don't know if you know who this chap is. Now I've got three sons, they've grown up now, left home, but as they were growing up, we used to have this kind of game, sort of the claim to fame game, and it used to be quite tenuous. You know, we used to be Or we went to watch Bath Rugby play against whoever, and we were in the concourse and we saw this rugby player and we managed to get his autograph. Well, that's a claim to fame. That's the game we used to play. Or we know someone who knows someone else who was a relative of someone else who knows someone. They're quite tenuous links. But this is a genuine claim to fame. So this is Colonel James Irwin, one of only 12 people to have walked on the moon. And he's the chap who drove the buggy on the moon. So sometimes you see the picture of the buggy on the moon. It was Colonel James Irwin who did that. And my claim to fame is I've had tea with him in my parents' house in Clevedon. That's not a bad claim to fame, is that, having tea with an astronaut? Anyway, the point is this. James Irwin, Christian man, with the Lord now, but he went to the moon, I don't know, early 70s, 71, 72, whatever year it was. But growing up, he had this ambition to go to the moon. So I'm not sure when he was born, in the 1940s or something like that. And so he used to tell his friends, one day I'm planning to go to the moon. And he told his parents, and he told his mother, I'm going to go to the moon. And his mother said, James, don't be silly, go and do something more useful with your life. But the fact, so this is probably in the early 1950s he was thinking this. So in the 1950s he's thinking, I want to go to the moon and I'm going to make it. And everyone else was thinking, don't be so stupid. But the point is, he had ambition and vision and he was aiming for it and he made it. And I think what you have here in this story is people with vision and willing to step out even when it seems this is crazy kind of thinking. And what you have in Acts 16 is Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke are on their journey. So they're coming from the east and they get to a position and they thought, well, we need to go north. But the way was stopped by the Holy Spirit. We're not told how. And then they thought, we'll go south. But that route was blocked as well. So here they are. They've been travelling from the east, going westward. And they come to a position and they think, well, we want to go north. We want to go south. All roads are blocked. Well, we can't go back east. That seems like defeat, going back to where we came from. What are we going to do? Well, you hopefully know the story. What we're told is that Paul had a vision one night, and a man from Macedonia says, come over and help us. That's what happened one night. And again, I'm picturing the scene. So breakfast the next morning, Paul, Silas, Timothy and Luke are sitting down, well, I don't know what they had, cornflakes, whatever they had. And Paul says, I think I know what we need to do. Now, if you're Silas or Luke or Timothy, what are you going to think? You're going to think, oh no, what's Paul thought of this time? And we're told, actually, it did require a lot of discussion, because in verse 10 it says, we concluded that. So you only conclude things when you have a discussion about things. So what happened was, Paul says, I think we need to go to Europe, into Macedonia. Europe? Are you sure? What are those Europeans like? We've never been to Europe. Now, they had proved God's faithfulness on the first missionary journey. And God had said to Paul that he would be basically an apostle to the Gentiles. But Europe, that involves a boat journey across the water to this unknown territory. You get the idea. But because they were sensitive to the leading of the Holy Spirit, they said, we're willing to step out and go to Macedonia because that's how the Lord has led. But we're not quite sure what we're going to expect. And actually, I think if they knew what they're going to expect, because by the end of chapter 16, Paul and Silas were in prison. I don't know where Timothy and Luke were at that time. They might have changed their mind. But the idea is that they stepped out in faith. In terms of gospel work, we need people we need a church to be a church of New Horizons vision. It might be you individually getting involved in the ministry of the church that you've never been involved in before, and you think, oh, children's work, that sounds scary, or whatever it happens to be, but you step out in faith. When it comes to global mission, actually, all the boxes aren't going to be ticked before you go. You are going to have to step out in faith. So I was speaking to a young couple on Friday evening. They were exploring mission in France. They were expecting their first baby, and they got lots of questions about what's childcare like in France, all those kind of questions. And they want to get as much information as they can, which is a good thing to do. But they know at some point, if they're going to go to France, they're just going to have to step out, not knowing all the answers to all the questions. And that's what gospel work is. It's stepping out in faith. That's what global mission is. It's trusting the Lord, knowing that he's been faithful in the past, and trusting him for the future. So we need to be, we need to understand that God uses all of us. We've all got gifts in gospel work. All of us need to be willing to step out in faith and trust him, knowing that he's been faithful in the past. And then thirdly, I've got here, I think this is, I'm a mathematician. That was my subject. And Hilary, you can relate to this math sum here, okay? But I said there's a basic formula here. If you see need and if you see opportunity, if you put those two things together, it should create vision. And once you've got vision, it should lead to action. And so just a couple of slides here about global mission. Talking about needs, talking about France. Do you know, if you want one church for every 10,000 people in France, you need another 4,000 churches in France. Okay, I don't know, what's the population of New Milton? 20,000, okay. But so if you want sort of effectively 2 churches for New Milton across the whole of France, that kind of distribution of churches, 4,000 more churches are needed. Massive need. Okay, next slide. Or Central Asia. I don't know how you define Central Asia. It's those countries you can't pronounce and you don't know where they are on the map. Basically the Stan countries. 500 million people in that part of the world, of which very, very few countries, less than 0.25% really, and in some countries it's down to 0.01%. So you can take a city the size of Birmingham, for example, and you might have 20, 25 Christians in that city, and that's Central Asia. Or another one, this is Spain, similar to France, similar to Italy. In Spain there are about 8,000 sort of designated towns or cities or villages, of which over 7,000 have no gospel witness at all. So that's a need in Spain. What else have I got? Okay, this takes a bit of thinking, but hopefully you bear with me. In terms of what's called unreached people groups, so that an unreached people group is a group of people that has not got its own church and has not got enough Christians in that people group even to start a church. Okay, it's not viable. So there's about 3.4 billion people in unreached people groups. So for every 1 million of those unreached people groups, there's only 4 missionaries. I just chose Gloucestershire, that's where I was born. It's like the whole of Gloucestershire having 2.5 Christians. So in terms of unreached people groups, there's a massive need for people to go, because currently it's like Gloucestershire having 2.5 Christians. Okay, next slide. And in terms of opportunities, again, this is going back to those 13 mission partners. These are some of the countries that UFM has mission partners in, but it just demonstrates there's massive opportunity across the world. So whether it happens to be Mexico or Malaysia, whether it happens to be Iraq or India or South Sudan, all those kind of places, Iceland's on there. So different opportunities. So there is need and there is opportunity, and that should create vision. Okay, thank you very much. What else does Global Mission need? And I think this is important. What else does New Milton Evangelical need? It needs new hearts. And if you like, the first two, we have that responsibility to use our gifts for the Lord. We have that responsibility to look and be visionary, but we do so knowing that the work of salvation belongs to the Lord. And in this story, we have three people who become Christians. So we didn't read the detail, but as you read the rest of chapter 16, you have Lydia, the seller of purple cloth, you have the slave girl, and then you have the Philippian jailer, all become Christians. And it's interesting that you have a whole range of people there. So you have male and female, you have young and old, you have rich and poor, you have what you might term upper class, lower class, you have family people, you have single people, you have the whole of society reached in the rest of chapter 16. So in other words, God can reach all parts of society. No one is excluded from the kingdom, and you see that demonstrated in chapter 16. But you have these three wonderful conversion stories, but there is one thing that links the three stories together. And I'm going to read three different verses, and hopefully in chapter 16, and hopefully you'll see the link between them. So in Acts chapter 16, verse, let me find it, verse 13, it says, on the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. Then Lydia was converted. Verse 16, this is just before the slave girl was converted. As we were going to the place of prayer, then you have the slave girl converted. And in verse 25, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying. I don't think it's coincidence that the three conversion stories all have a link to prayer. And so when we do gospel work, we do so trusting the Lord, praying that he would open people's hearts and that people will be wonderfully converted. Just as we conclude, a couple of stories maybe. Not on the slide. I'll tell you a couple of stories. Southeast Asia, in a country which is much in conflict. Recently, our Youth and Mission partners in this particular country shared the story of a man who became a Christian and burnt all his idols because he'd found faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. His wife is still quite opposed, but he became a Christian. That's happened in the last couple of months. Or in Uganda, we've got some mission partners there just north of Kampala. They've had 45 baptisms in the last 18 months as people have heard the gospel in a sort of a Christian country, but not understanding the gospel, have heard the gospel preached and suddenly realised this is what the message of the Bible is all about. Or a church in Charlestown in Southern Ireland recently just had 6 baptisms. Again, you're in a country which is the least reached English-speaking country, actually, Ireland. Lots of religion, but very few Christian gospel churches. But in Charleston, there's 6 baptisms. And there's lots of stories. I've just been, a couple of months ago, I went to a place in Hungary, northwest Hungary, and they've just, last Sunday, so a week ago, they've just formally constituted a church in this city. Only 9 of them, but that church didn't exist. And that town is quite a big town with very little gospel witness. So the Lord is doing a work across the world. So what does global mission need? It does need people to be involved. And we can all be involved in global mission. Some will be in their own home church, but some will be sent from that church to different parts of the world. We just need to be people of vision and willing to step out in faith and willing to be sensitive to how the Lord leads. And we need the Lord himself to work and open the hearts of men and women and boys and girls.